All right, good morning, everyone, and welcome to today's training on working with buyers. We're going to go over the procedures that we need to take as realtors when we're working with buyers. We're going to go over the buyer broker agreement. We're also going to go over our buyer package inside of Form Simplicity and much more. Folks, if you have any questions, you can always ask your questions inside of our chat. You can also unmute yourself and ask questions. We are recording our session, and I do plan on sharing this with you guys later today. All right, so let's go ahead and get started, folks. When you are working with a buyer, and this is something that I created for you guys, I will be sharing it with you at a later time. It's a template on what we should be doing when we were working with buyers. It's going to include the buyer broker agreements, also going to include the as is contract and other addendums that I will share with you in today's class. So, what are the first things that you need to do when you are getting ready to work with a buyer? Of course, you will ask your buyer if they are purchasing in cash or if they are financing. All right. If they are financing, you want to ask if they have an approval already from a lender. If they do not have an approval, then you can ask to get started on the approval process before showing too many properties. Now, that doesn't mean you can't go show first couple of properties just to meet them, sit down with them and talk to them and see exactly what their goals are in purchasing a property. You don't want to ask for an approval right away, but definitely within the first couple of showings, you want to ask if they have an approval letter, if they have been approved, so you know exactly what you're shopping for and what they can afford. You don't want to waste too much time driving around the city without really knowing if they can afford those types of properties. Secondly, we want to see if they're willing to sign an exclusive buyer broker agreement. All right. Especially if you don't really know the buyer too well, if they're like a referral or it was a lead that was given to you, it's a good idea to get an exclusive buyer broker agreement. Now, if the buyer is someone you know, it's a family, it's a friend, then it may not be necessary. Now, there are obviously two reasons why we want to get a buyer broker agreement. This protects you with the time that you spent showing them properties, right? And it secures a payment or a commission for you if they decide to purchase a property that you showed them with another realtor. So here's an example. You're working with a buyer, you showed them several properties, and then they go zero dark 30 on you. They pretty much they shut you out. They stop responding to you, and then you find out that they actually purchased a property that you showed them with another realtor. Well, a buyer broker agreement is going to protect you against that, and it's going to allow you to get paid a certain commission for that happening. Okay. And then the other reason why we may need a buyer broker agreement, folks, is that there are changes happening in our industry where sellers are now not required to pay the buyer agent a commission. You're going to start seeing lots of different listings on the MLS where they're maybe paying 1% to a cooperating broker or even $1 to a cooperating broker. So, as a buyer agent, how do we make money here? You're going to have to present this buyer broker agreement and let your buyer know in the event that a commission is not paid by the listing agent or the seller, then they will have to pay your commission. Okay. We're going to review the buyer broker agreement in detail a little later. Then, of course, once they agree to place an offer on a property, we are going to go to Form Simplicity, which is what we use to create our new transaction. You're going to add the forms from our forms package labeled Purchase Contract As Is Far Bar. Now, the reason why you want to use our forms package is because our office has already pre-filled some of the information that's necessary in each contract, and you want to make sure you're using it. If you go to the blank forms section, you are going to be using a contract that has not been pre-filled with important data. All right. Filling out an as-is contract does not need to be difficult if you go and you use the one that we provided inside of the forms package. And I will point that out to you a little later in our training. Of course, you are going to need a lead-based paint disclosure if the property was built before 1978. If you are purchasing a condo, you will need a condo rider as well. And if you are going to be using an appraisal contingency, you want to make sure that you add the appraisal contingency addendum, and you want to make sure that you also add the conveyance to a foreign buyer addendum. Again, we're going to go over all of that shortly. All right, you want to make sure that you also correctly fill out each form, okay? Dates to remember when you're filling out a form, the date of acceptance. All right, so when does the offer expire? Also, the earnest money, which is due within 3 days of the executed contract date. So if I present a contract today and it gets accepted on Friday, a deposit is due by the following Wednesday, right? 3 business days. Also, the inspection period. Make sure that you know what your inspection period is. Inside of our broker package, the as-is contract, we've went ahead and pre-filled that to 10 days. All right, so if they agree to an inspection period of 10 days, then you need to make sure you get inspection done pretty much within the first 5 days. All right, giving you some time, some wiggle room to negotiate a lower price if needed or cancel out of the contract. Your loan commitment date, that's also an important date. Usually it's 30 days. All right, so 30 days from the executed date of the contract, you want to have a loan commitment completed from the lender. And then, of course, a closing date. All right, those are the dates that you should remember. Also, on an appraisal contingency, if your contract is contingent on an appraisal, then you want to add the appraisal contingency addendum, and you want to put in the minimum price that the property should appraise and the date in which the appraisal is to be completed. Just a few years ago, it was not a good idea to submit offers with an appraisal contingency because it was such a hot seller's market and many people were buying without any type of appraisal needed. Nowadays, it's a little different, and you want to protect your buyer and you want to save them some money, you should include an appraisal contingency. Once the offer is accepted, guys, please make sure that you send all offers to our transaction coordinator, which is eliteofficetc@gmail.com. eliteofficetc@gmail.com. And you want to also make sure that you copy me, and that's robertr.miami@gmail.com. You want to send all documents to your title company, the title company you will be using. If you need some options for title companies, you can always contact me and I will provide you. Next up, you want to schedule an inspection. As I mentioned before, an inspection should be scheduled within the first 5 days. I'd say the moment you get your contract accepted, you should have your buyer already shopping for a home inspection and schedule it as soon as possible. Home inspections are usually around $300. It is paid by the buyer, and you do have a 10-day inspection period into which you can back out of the contract if needed. All right. Your buyer's earnest money will be returned if they back out of the contract within that 10-day period. You can find available inspection companies at miamirealtors.com/affiliates. So go to the association website, miamirealtors.com/affiliates, and you'll be able to find many different inspection companies. All right, the buyer also needs to apply for financing within 5 days of the contract date. Okay, so that's why having a pre-approval is necessary. So once the offer has been accepted, they should forward all the documents over to the lender, and the lender needs to be creating the application, the loan application, within a 5-day period of the contract date. All right, so I'm getting several questions. Is this procedure available? Sorry, is this available inside of Form Simplicity? No, it's not. We're actually going to send it to all of our agents in an email blast. So stay tuned. I'm also going to upload it for you guys in our chat so you can have it right away. All right, so once I stop sharing the screen, I'm going to go ahead and upload it in our chat so you guys can download it right away. But we are going to also send it to all our agents in an email blast. Okay. All right. So the lender again will order an appraisal after the financing application. The lender will order an appraisal. Once again, that's at the buyer's
Hi.
expense.
Which one is it? This one. It's this one? I don't know either.
Sorry about that. I'm gonna ask if you guys could remain on mute while we're having the training. You can unmute yourself if you want to ask questions, but just remain on mute so we can have a clean recording, guys. All right, so question that's coming in, that's okay. Question that's coming in the chat, if the offer is a backup offer, do they need to apply for the loan within 5 days? The loan application is only when the contract is accepted. So your buyer does not need to submit a loan application until a contract is accepted. So if it is a backup offer, it still hasn't been accepted. It's just a backup offer. All right, so it's 5 days within the execution of the contract. All right, moving on. So again, the appraisal work will occur, and usually you want the appraisal to occur within the first 2 weeks. However, if you look on the contract, we can put in up to 20 days or 3 weeks. The loan approval must come in within 30 days of the contract date. So the bank needs to have the loan approved, and there should be steps to closing after that. So 30 days for loan approval. Again, the appraisal needs to be performed prior to loan approval. All right, the buyer will receive a loan estimate within 3 days of the closing. It's not something that you should worry about. The lender's going to do all of this, but it's good to know, right? It's good to know that your buyer is going to know what their estimated closing cost is and everything 3 days prior to closing. On closing day, guys, please make sure that you send all documents to the transaction coordinator, which is eliteofficetc@gmail.com. You also want to copy our broker tail, and that's tail at eliteoceanviewrealty.com. And you want to copy me as well. The required documents in closing is the final closing statement, all signed contracts, copy of the commission disbursement form. You also want to drop off the check and closing statement at one of our Elite offices or arrange a wire transfer. If the title company is going to be wiring the money to us, please send an email to elitehelpcenter@gmail.com for wire instructions. Commission checks can also be mailed overnight to our Miami Beach office, and the address is 210 71st Street, Suite 305. All right, so moving on, guys. Where do we find all of these documents? Of course, in Form Simplicity. All right, you're going to go here and you're going to click on blank forms, right? And what I was letting you guys know before is that you're not going to search for a form here. Most of you will just come here and do this as is, and you're going to see the as is residential contract for sale and purchase. You're going to open it and you're going to start filling it out. But here's what's missing, guys. Everything is missing. All right. Everything is missing. The escrow agency is missing. All the important dates that we have marked is missing. All the check marks that we have marked is missing. So you actually do not want to use this one. You want to use somewhat of a template. So you actually want to come here to the broker packages, so the forms packages, and you want to use this one right here, which is the purchase contract as is FAR bar. Okay. You come here, and these are the forms that are pre-filled for you. Here's the as-is residential contract for sale and purchase. When you use this form, you will see some pre-filled material. This package also contains the condominium rider, so the condo rider. If you are purchasing a condo, you will need to attach this to your contract. Here is the appraisal contingency. Here is the lead-based paint disclosure. All right, and then there are other addendums that are in here as well. You may also want to add an additional, an addendum to the contract, just in case you need it. You can have it already part of your transaction inside of Form Simplicity. And then down here, there's that new addendum, conveyance to foreign buyers. It is not always necessary if your buyer especially is from the US to have one of these. All right. But this is something that is going to be required by our state if you are representing a buyer from one of the foreign countries under this law. Okay. So these are your contracts that are inside of the purchase package, purchase contract as is FAR. All right, I want to go ahead and share another screen with you guys where it's a template that I created. All right, that goes over the buyer broker agreement. Oh, first of all, where do you find the buyer broker agreement? All right, well, it's very simple, guys. You can come up here to the packages. You see right here where it says buyer package, you open it, and there's the exclusive buyer broker agreement, transaction broker. All right,
Yes.
guys. So this is how you're gonna fill out a buyer broker agreement. Of course, it is not always necessary. However, if you feel like you need to have one of these filled out and presented to your buyer, this is how you're gonna fill it out. So of course, the buyer's names will be at the very top where it says broker, Elite Ocean View Realty is already there. If it's not there because you're using one of the blank forms, then go ahead and fill out Elite Ocean View Realty. Number two is the term of the agreement. So the begin date and the end date, that's pretty simple. Number three, property buyer is interested in acquiring real property as follows or as otherwise acceptable to buyer property. So what type of property are they looking for? So you must specify here if they're looking for a single family home, condo, townhome, or all of them. Okay. My recommendation is that you actually enter single family home, condo, and townhouse. You don't want to exclude any of those. And then you want to enter the location that their search preferences. So if they tell you that we're looking in Homestead, then you want to enter here Homestead. If they're telling you they're looking in all of Miami-Dade County, then I recommend that you put in all of Miami-Dade County. If it's Miami-Dade and Broward County, then put in all of Miami-Dade and Broward County. All right. Don't just put in a city like Homestead because this agreement's going to protect you in all of the locations that you enter. So I highly recommend you put in Miami-Dade in general and also Broward County if they're interested in Broward. And then their price range. What is their minimum budget? What's their max budget? All right. It is important that we put their price range here as well. And then for C, underneath that, have they been pre-approved or pre-qualified? All right, so that's important. Also, under what terms have they been pre-approved or qualified? So are they qualified for a conventional loan? Are they qualified for an FHA or VA loan? You want to specify that there. And then for D, preferred terms and conditions. So an example to this would be if the lender has approved your buyer, but it's contingent on the sale of their current home. That happens a lot, right? They don't quite have the funds yet, but they will have it as soon as they sell their home. So that's something that you'll place under D. Then number four pretty much explains our responsibility as a buyer agent. So use the broker's professional knowledge and skills, assist buyers in determining buyers' financial capability and financial options. Remember, guys, we are not lenders. All we can do is give them some recommendations. Let a lender prepare their approval, right? Their financial obligations And if you need help with a lender, remember we do have affiliated lenders here at Elite Ocean View Realty. And you can always reach out to me if you need a recommendation. Or you can reach out to our help center, folks. Remember, we have a help center. It's elitehelpcenter@gmail.com. All right, so this talks about our obligations as a buyer agent, and then moving into the important parts of this agreement, which is the buyer's obligation. Our obligation doesn't change. Whether we have this agreement signed or not, our obligations never change. Now, what is your buyer's obligation? So the buyer agrees to cooperate with the broker in accomplishing the objectives of this agreement. A, conducting all negotiation and efforts to locate suitable property only through the broker and referring to the broker at all times. B, providing broker with accurate personal and financial information requested by the broker in connection with ensuring buyer's ability to acquire the property. Once again, if we ask the buyer for an approval letter, they must provide us one. Okay? Being able to meet with the broker at reasonable times for consultations and to view properties. Once again, at reasonable times. If our buyer's only able to see properties late at night, 8, 9, 10 o'clock at night, it's going to be very difficult for us to work with them. Okay, so moving on to number 6, it's a retainer fee. Now, you know how when we work with an attorney, usually we have to pay a retainer fee to acquire their services, sort of like a deposit. All right, so this is a little touchy subject since buyers are not really used to this. For a very long time, it's been the standard where buyers never have to worry about paying a commission to a buyer agent, and commissions are usually paid by the seller. So to protect yourself, you may want to add a retainer fee and ask for a retainer fee, something that you feel comfortable with. It could be $1,000, it could be $2,000, something you feel comfortable that if something happens, if they decide that they no longer want to work with you and you've put in some time and effort, then that retainer fee is yours to keep. Now, the retainer fee is not refundable and will or will not be credited to the buyer's compensation. All right. So the commission that you will charge them at the end of the transaction. So is it refundable? Right? It's not refundable. And will it be applied towards your compensation or will it not be applied towards your compensation? Okay. You need to check one or the other. Compensation, broker's compensation is earned when during the term of this agreement or any renewal or extension, buyer or any person acting on the behalf of the buyer contracts to acquire a real property. All right. So the purchase or exchange is a flat fee or 3%, 2%, whatever you agree with the buyer of the purchase price. Guys, in the event, and you will see this, hopefully not too much, right? But you will see this in the event that the seller is not paying the buyer agent commission and your buyer likes the property and wants to proceed with a purchase of the property, then you need to obtain commission from your buyer. You're not going to work for free. So you need to put here either a flat fee, and I've heard many realtors discuss this already, right? They're thinking about a flat fee, a number that's comfortable for them. Let's say $7,500. But $7,500 for a $300,000 home seems good. But $7,500 for $1,000,000 property is not good. So I would stay away from flat fees unless you guys are comfortable working for, $7,500, $10,000, let's say, for any kind of property. I would actually go with percentage of the purchase price. Okay. This buyer broker agreement is also good for leasing. So when you're working with a tenant, you can secure they can secure your services. And then of course you can protect yourself by doing the same thing over here, but putting it down here. This other fee that you see here is that they will also pay the processing fee, right? That $4.95 processing fee from Elite Ocean View Realty. Now, if you are a buyer agent and you want to give a break to your buyer and you want to cover the processing fee costs, it's really up to you. Protection period, very important, guys. I put here 365 days. You guys can change it. So let's read what this is. Buyer will pay broker's compensation if within 365 days after the termination date, buyer contracts to acquire any property which was called to by the buyer attention by the broker. So basically, any properties that I showed my buyer, any properties that I emailed my buyer, and this contract is no longer valid, it has been terminated, and they buy it with another agent within that 365 day period, they owe me commission. All right. So that's what this means. So let's make sure we know how to fill this out and how much grace period are you going to give them. It says 365 because that's exactly how it says it in our buyer broker package. You may want to change this to 30 days, 60 days, whatever that may be. Now there is a termination period. Once again, the termination period, if they happen to contract to buy a property during that termination period, they also agree to pay you said fee that you put up here, right? 3%, and definitely lose a retainer as well. Okay. Guys, so that's pretty much your buyer broker agreement. The special clause is that the buyer will pay $4.95 transaction broker fee at closing to Elite Ocean View Realty. That's again written in your contract as well. And that's your buyer broker agreement. It's very simple to fill out. Just please, it's very simple to read too. I mean, it's only 2 pages. Make sure that you read each and every paragraph and that you understand it. If you have any questions, you can always reach out to Tail. You can reach out to myself, and we gladly will go over this with you. All right, let me go ahead and open up our as-is contract and let's share it with you guys now. All right, so we are now looking at the as-is residential contract for sale and purchase, which is again available inside of Form Simplicity. If you log in and go to our broker package, you'll be able to find this form. All right, so this is a 12-page 13-page contract, guys. So here we have the seller's name and the buyer's name. Make sure that you know how to locate the seller's name. All right, so you can locate the seller's name using IMAP. You can use Realist. You can use, public records. You put in the seller's name. Then your buyer's name, of course, you're going to put it here, the property address, the folio number, and the full legal description. All right, so right here you have line 22 is other personal property that will be included in the sale of the home. You want to place it here. And then line 25, any personal property excluded from the sale of the purchase of the home, you want to put it here. All right, if on the listing they say all furniture included, then you want to put here all furniture included. If they say in the listing all furniture available for sale, then that's not included. It's available for sale. You can decline the option to purchase the furniture. Okay. Let's say they have a beautiful barbecue grill in the backyard and they're going to take that with them. Then that is not included in the sale of the property. Okay. Right here, you're going to place your purchase price, and then here you're going to place the deposit, the earnest money. Okay. Title company, escrow agency, who is holding the deposit. Guys, if you need a recommendation, especially those of you that are newer realtors and you haven't had experience yet with any title companies, then please contact me. I will give you recommendations for a title company. Okay. But if you already have your own title companies that you trust and you want to use them, then that's the place that you will place the escrow agent name and the title company. The escrow agency or the title company is going to then send instructions to your buyer to wire them the deposit. Deposit must be made within 3 days. You want to place 3 days here. If you leave it blank, it does default to 3 days. Next up is your additional deposit. It is not necessary for an additional deposit. However, if an additional deposit will be made, you need to place here how many days after the date of execution or effective date will the additional deposit be made. If left in blank, it defaults to 10 days. Jonathan, question. Yes. Go ahead, unmute yourself.
Yes, sir. I have a question. I know that the buyer in most cases will designate the closing company or title company. What if they designate something and then for the seller side, they also have fees, right? They have closing costs too. What if the closing costs are higher with that title company than it would be on one that they would have picked? Is there any way to separate, or do they have to do the whole transaction with that title
No,
company?
the sellers can use their own title company.
What are the things that the seller would do for the title company that they would do their own?
I mean, in reality, the costs are very minimal when you're selling the property.
Okay.
But the seller can most definitely use their own title company. There'll be two title companies working the transaction. At closing, the seller will go to their title company, sign the paperwork, then it'll be couriered over to the buyer's title company for the second half of the closing. Um, Normally, you shouldn't have any issues with the seller agreeing to the buyer's title company. And the other way around, we want to use our title company while we're representing a buyer, but sometimes you come across a seller that says we require that you use our title company. So
Can they
the
require that though, or is that really?
can they? Yes. I mean, I just had that like 3, 4 weeks ago where I was
Mm,
placing an offer with a property and I put in our title company and our title company reviewed it. And then the seller said, well, wait a minute. There's an addendum that says that you must use our title company. And that's allowed. Okay. Um,
all right.
the costs are very minimal for a seller,
So
Uh,
then I
they're,
don't
they're,
really need to
they're,
worry about it too much.
I mean, when we say the cost is the fee, not the
Right.
like the cost, everyone's gonna, every title company is gonna come up with the cost that the seller needs to pay. There's stuff that the seller needs to pay, but the fee itself, it's not gonna be too different
Okay. Okay,
from
that's fine.
from one agency to the other. Yep.
I called a title company that I usually work with last time I represented a buyer, and they said, no, there's really nothing we can do if you're representing the seller. There's really nothing. I'm like, okay, that's fine. But okay. All
Yeah.
right. I just wanted
Yeah.
to confirm.
I mean, like you said, you can call and you can say, "Hey, what do you guys charge sellers during closing?" They'll tell you $1,000, $500, $700, whatever it may be, and shop around. You know, so you can do that.
So what if I get an offer though? Could the seller call, or me representing the seller call that title company and ask them how much they charge, and then be
You
like, we
you
could
absolutely
counter offer based on that?
Yeah, you absolutely want to do your own recommendations. There are a lot of
Okay.
really great title companies, and recently I sent out an email over this weekend, having you guys call me if you need help with a title company. I can recommend really excellent ones. We're using one right now, and yes, so please call me if you need any recommendations.
Okay. I'll do that. Thank you.
All right, awesome. And you don't have to call me, guys. If you don't even have my number, just go to our group chat, our elite group chat, and write to me, and I will respond to you right away.
And thank you, Robert, for doing this, because honestly, I was on the phone with a client for almost an hour last night. I took a screenshot of it, almost an hour, but that's because we're going through the contract line by line. But because we do these trainings, I know the contract inside out. So So
Yeah.
anyway, thank you.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And the buyer, so the buyer can definitely use their own title company. They're like, they won't even listen to your recommendations. They say, look, I'm very good friends with this title company, and I want to use it, and that's fine. We're here to provide a service. So if they don't need our lending service or our title company recommendations, that's fine too. Okay. All right, guys. So again, the deposit, additional deposit, and then the amount financed. So if they are financing 80%, then you want to put in 80%. The balance to close will automatically be calculated. Balance to close is going to be whatever money is left over from the deposit, additional deposit, and how much more do they need to complete that 20% down payment. This is not balance to close, including closing costs. This is balance to close only for financing. Date that the offer expires is very important, guys. 3 business days, or if you really are trying to put pressure on the seller, then you can do 1 day, you can do 2 days, whatever you like. So that would be the date that your offer expires. Next up, of course, would be the closing date. So you want to put in here the expected closing date. Let's say we put in April 15th. Or what a crazy day, it's tax day. So let's say we put in April 15th. We can definitely close before April 15th. All right. So just because you put April 15th here doesn't mean that you can't close on April 10th. Now, if the closing for some reason gets pushed beyond the closing date that you have here, then you would have to submit a blank addendum extending the closing date and have it signed by the seller and buyer. I also see a lot of people putting here within 45 days of effective date, which is also fine. You want to close within 30 days, but if you want to give yourself ample time, it's recommended that you go 45 days from effective date. All right, so just pay attention to what I have marked here, guys. I mean, you guys can go through the entire contract, like Jonathan said, line by line. And it is recommended that you study it. Like as a realtor, we should know this contract line by line. But I'm going to go ahead and point out some of the more important features. So here in number 7, all right, we want to make sure that we check this one here. May assign but not be released from liability under this contract. All right, so under assignability, we want to make sure that we check this one here. By the way, it's already checked for you in our package. This is why it's important that we use our package. Then 8, financing. All right, you're going to check whether it's going to be FHA, conventional, VA, right? The financing type. If it's a cash deal, then of course you will check A. Okay. If it's financing, you will check B. The loan commitment or the loan approval, not approval, sorry, the loan commitment must be made within 30 days. This is already marked for you in the buyer in the purchase contract package. So within 30 days, you need a loan commitment. And as I mentioned before in our procedures, the loan application must be in within 5 days from effective date. If you leave it blank, it defaults to 5 days. Buyer shall make application for financing within 5 days after the effective date. All right, moving on down. Right here, you may want to put $495 processing fee to Elite Ocean View Realty. However, in the additional terms section of our contract, that's also going to be there. So it's really your option whether you want to place that here or not. Cost to be paid by the buyer. All right, line 174. You want to make sure that you check this off here. And once again, it is automatically checked for you inside of our broker package. Same with line 196. Seller shall pay in full prior to or at the time of closing any assessments allowed by the public body to be prepaid. All right, so that is going to be checked for you. Again, if you use a blank form without using our package, that's not going to be checked for you. And if you're just breezing right through this contract, you may miss this. Important. Seller shall make arrangements to pay all assessments at closing, unless, of course, you agree the buyer to pay the assessments. All right, inspection period, property inspection period, right to cancel. Guys, a lot of buyers are panicking when they place a deposit and they say, well, what if I want to cancel? Can I get my money back? So number 12, property inspection, right to cancel. Property inspections and the right to cancel. Buyers should have 10 days. If you leave it in blank, it defaults to 15 days. Not many sellers are going to want to see 15 here. Guys, sellers want you to get that inspection done quickly and that period to be over quickly so they have a true executed contract, right? So you want to place 10 days here, that's fine. After effective date, that's your inspection period. Once again, you should have that inspection scheduled the day that you have an executed contract. So once the offer is accepted, fully signed by everyone, your buyer should be scheduling an inspection for the property to happen the day after or the day after that. All right. If the buyer determines that the property is not suitable for them, they can cancel and their money is returned. Of course, if they want to continue with the purchase, but there are several issues with the property, they can negotiate with the seller to bring down that price or negotiate a credit towards their closing costs. And that's done with an addendum. It's done with an addendum where you'll write seller and buyer agree that seller will contribute, let's say, $2,000 towards closing costs. And then you have the seller and buyer sign it and you send it to transaction coordinator, send it to the title company and lender, and it is now agreed that the seller will contribute towards closing costs. So those are kind of negotiations that you will have after the inspection has been performed. Then, of course, if the property does pass inspection and there are no real issues with the property, then nothing will be negotiated. All right, so if you notice, I'm pretty much scrolling through all of this because it's all verbiage. It's verbiage you should read and be familiar with, but it's not that I don't really want to point it out right now, okay? Because this is not a contrast class. Now, here we have the addendum and additional terms, guys. Just because you mark it here doesn't mean you have it completed. You are identifying here what addendums you will use in your contracts. So if you are buying a condo, you will include a condominium rider. If you are buying in an HOA, you will include the homeowners association addendum. All right. If you're buying FHA, you will include the FHA VA financing. If you are submitting an appraisal contingency, you will select F. Okay. If you are buying a property that was built in 1978 or prior to 1978, you will include a lead-based paint disclosure. Off to the right, it's automatically checked for you in our broker package that you are including the seller property disclosure and the conveyance of a foreign buyer. You want to make sure that you choose these addendums and also attach those addendums in your offer. Under the additional terms, this is already written for you, so I wrote it in red so you guys can see it. Buyer will pay $495 transaction broker fee at closing to Elite Ocean View Realty. Seller shall close any open or expired permits or code violations against the subject property at seller's sole cost prior to closing. They don't have to come up with the money right away. Let's say their proceeds are $100,000 due to them. The title company will then subtract from those $100,000 to pay for their permits and code violations and liens against their property. This provision shall supersede paragraph 12 of the contract. Okay. And that's it. You want to make sure that it's signed by your buyer and then, of course, signed by the seller. Also, underneath here at the very end where our brokerage is, you want to make sure you put in 3% commission. So something I spoke to Tail about, and I agree with him. Even if it says 2.5% or 2% on the MLS, when you submit the offer, let the listing agent come back and say, hey, it's 2% or 2.5%. Because if we put 3% here always, and it's returned by the seller's signatures, that's your commission, guys, not what it's on the MLS. That's your commission. So let's make sure that we always write 3% next to our brokerage name, even if it says 2.5% in the MLS. Let the listing agent figure that out, right? And if they miss it, then, tough luck on them. All right, guys. So, and I'm gonna share this template with you guys. We're gonna get ready to send an email blast and then also make it available to everyone. So please be patient. That is our as is template. I'm gonna go ahead and now share Form Simplicity with you guys. So logging into Form Simplicity, you guys can see my screen. I know you can because it says we're sharing the screen. All right, so what other addendums will you be including? So let's say that we are including an appraisal contingency. All right, we're gonna go here to the forms packages, and we're gonna select our purchase contract as is, and we're gonna include this one in our offer. Okay, I am gonna show it to you. I'm gonna go ahead and select this one, this one. I'm also gonna select the lead-based paint disclosure. Okay, I'm gonna select an addendum to a contract, and I'm gonna go ahead and select the conveyance to foreign buyers. All right, now we're gonna go ahead and click on create a new transaction. And I'm just gonna go and name this 123 Main Street. All right, same as the transaction address. It's a residential, it's a purchase, and then go ahead and click on add to a new transaction. Here are all the forms that are part of my transaction. Guys, look, I'm gonna open up the as is. You're gonna see several items pre-filled. Okay, all appliances over here, 3 days for our deposit. Okay, 12 days for our additional deposit. 30 days here for the the contract to be contingent on getting a loan approval. Okay, and then 5 days for the loan application. All of that, everything we just went over is pre-filled for you. These check marks are pre-filled for you. So please make sure you are using the as-is contract from our broker package. All right, dropping down to our inspection period. Did I pass the inspection period already? I sure did. I went too fast. It's number 12. There you go. All right, inspection period. It is pre-filled as 10 days. Once again, if you leave it blank, it can be 15 days. All right, so 10 days. All right, so that's our as is, but let's go over now the appraisal contingency. All right, so very important. If your contract is contingent on a property appraising, let's say the property is for sale at $600,000 and you put an offer in for $600,000. Okay, then you want to put here $600,000. You want to put in here the date in which the appraisal must be completed. So our appraisal contingency should go to what's today's date? Today's March 12th. Let's go to by March 29th, for example. All right, so about 17 days or so. So by March 29th, an appraisal must be obtained and the price should be $600,000 minimum. I mean, that's great. If the appraisal comes in at 630, that means that your buyer is buying a property that has equity. But if the appraisal comes in at 550, you have options, right? You have options. So the buyer can come out of pocket to complete the rest of the money because the bank's not going to loan you money on a property that you're purchasing for 600,000 when they believe it's worth 550. So your buyer needs to come up with $50,000, or you can negotiate with the seller to bring it down to 550, or you can negotiate with the seller to meet you halfway. So for example, 575. And now your buyer only has to come up with 25,000 out of pocket. And the last option, guys, is that your buyer can walk away from the transaction because it does not appraise. Only if you include this appraisal contingency. Very important. If you are going to submit a property that's not subject to appraisal, then that means your buyer agrees to pay in full the property, the purchase price they agreed upon. No, regardless of the appraisal. Regardless if the appraisal comes in at $500,000, they agreed to buy it for 600,000, and that's without the contingency. Okay. So in most cases, guys, if you want to protect your buyer, you want to do an appraisal contingency, put in the date of the appraisal contingency, period, and then also the price, the minimum price it should be, which it should be the purchase price. Any questions on this appraisal contingency? No questions. All right, closing it out. And we're gonna go ahead and show you the lead-based paint disclosure that should also be filled out. You wanna make sure that the party names are over here. You're gonna get buyer's initials and seller's initials over here. And once again, it is pre-filled out for you guys. It is pre-filled for you. Seller's disclosure, buyer's acknowledgement. So your buyer's initials will be here. Your seller's initials will be here. All right, so pre-filled means that it's already been checked. All right, for A, we have seller has no knowledge of lead-based paint or lead-based paint hazards in the housing. Usually the one that's checked. If the seller does know that the paint it's contaminated with lead, then known lead-based paint or lead-based paint hazards are present in the housing. So pay attention. Which one is going to be returned to you, with the check mark. All right, for B, we have here seller has no reports or reports pertaining to lead-based paint or lead-based paint hazards in the housing. Once again, that's usually the one that's going to be marked. The seller pretty much wipes their hands like, I don't know anything, right? They're going to initial it. And then, of course, your buyer is going to initial that they have received this acknowledgement. They're going to have the signatures down here. And your lead-based paint disclosure is completed. Guys, if you're placing an offer for a home built before 1978, a condo building built before 1978, and this is not part of your offer, your contract is not valid. Any good title company will catch that. All right, so when you submit the executed contract to your title company and you do not submit this, they should be alerting you by the next morning that you need a lead-based paint disclosure signed and completed. All right, that's your lead-based paint disclosure. And then let's go over the addendum to a contract. It's real simple. It's called a blank addendum. And usually I like to include this in all of my transactions so it could be there, just so it could be there. So addendum number 1, this is your first addendum. Addendum number 2, addendum number 10. Who knows how many times you're going to have to change the terms of the agreement? You're going to place the number of addendums here and the effective date right there. and then whatever you want to write, you write it there. So for example, when we said after inspection, and let's say the seller and buyer agree that the seller will pay $5,000 towards closing costs, and that's exactly what you're going to write here. You're going to write seller and buyer agree that the seller will contribute $5,000 as a credit to the buyer closing costs. So now the title company knows that $5,000 needs to be charged to the seller at closing. Or if you agree to lower the price instead, then right here, you're going to put in seller and buyer agree that the new purchase price is $595,000. Okay. And again, have the buyer and seller sign it. Addendums can be used to change the agreement. It can be used to extend the closing. Seller and buyer agree, to extend the closing to, I don't know, what did I put? Whatever, April 16th instead of April 15th. All right. So again, the addendums can be used for any reason. And then the last one here is conveyance to a foreign buyer's addendum. So go ahead and open it up, get familiar with this form. All right. So in Florida, we have this conveyance to foreign buyers where we must sign it if we are representing buyers from one of these countries. All right. Do not ask me why. That's just a law. It's a crime to buy or knowingly sell property in violation of the act. So if you are knowingly representing a buyer from one of these foreign countries, then you must have this signed by your buyer and then, of course, the seller as well. Any questions to this here? You can always Google it. You can always find out more information. So this is a new law effective last summer, July 1st, 2023. All right. All right, folks, that is going to wrap up our training for today. Once again, guys, if you need recommendations for title companies, please call me. If you need recommendations for a lender, we have Elisa, we have Daniel, and they are, excellent at acquiring and providing loans for our buyers. Okay. All right, guys. So any questions right now before we end? Everything was clear. You guys understood it? Yes? All right, guys. So have a wonderful day, and we'll talk soon. Bye for now.